Good evening and a warm welcome to the Rushcliffe Borough Council's Corporate Overview Group meeting. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information, England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, tweet or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you're not speaking. Thank you. And also to switch them on when you are, because it directs the camera. We have officers attending tonight. We have Peter Linfield, Director of Finance and Corporate Services, Ed Palmer, Communications and Customer Services Manager, Katie Brennan, Senior Finance Business Partner, Chevalier Douglas, Emergency Planning Officer, and Tracy Coop, Democratic Services Officer. I'll now move to the first item on the agenda, and that is apologies.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Williams this evening.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. We'll then move to the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September. Everybody will have read those minutes, and you will note that under the actions, you've received 2 updated actions on pages 9 and 6. However, is there anything in the minutes that anyone wishes to raise? Councillor Plant.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I think last time I mentioned that there's, to be fair, they were in my ward, quite a few projects that were moved into the next financial year. And I sort of queried whether we could have reasons why that happened. And I just to note that this time in the report, that's actually been done. So I was just saying, thank you for that. It's just helpful to sort of know.
Does anyone wish to respond to that then?
Well, just to show we do listen.
Okay. Anybody else have any comment on the minutes? So that's fine, so I can sign those as a true record. Right. We move to item 4, the business continuity strategy. And that is Chevalier.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll just give a brief outline of the strategy and then take questions after that. So the document outlines the business continuity strategy for Rushcliffe Borough Council, designed to ensure that RBC can continue its critical functions in the event of a disruption, minimising the impact on our services, stakeholders, and obviously the community. It's a holistic management process, identifies potential threats to the organisation and its impact on our services, provides a framework for building organisational resilience, has the capability for effective response and safeguards the interests of stakeholders. The objectives are to protect the welfare of our employees and the community and ensure that we have the continuity of the critical services. The strategy of how we do this is we have a risk assessment to identify and assess the risks. We then carry out what's called a business impact assessment to determine the critical functions and then just develop strategies around this to manage those risks and the impact that's identified. And then we create this document and it feeds into our business continuity plan. And we carry on this cycle of lessons learned, put that back into the document, and hopefully we can plan and avoid any issues.
Thank you. So that covers us and makes us prepared for any unforeseen events, such as COVID, which I think this council handled extremely well. So yes, we're keeping that up to date. Does anybody have anything they wish to ask? Councillor Plant?
Yes, I obviously have read it. You know, it is not the most exciting read by any means, but it is. Well, it's probably that we actually don't want it to be really, but obviously, you know, we live in pretty uncertain times, and they seem to be getting more uncertain. So it is crucial that we have such a document. And we did have an incident, I think, didn't we, in terms of when IT certainly was affected for a while. Or have I made that one? Yes, and obviously that includes, you know, having some sort of backup system, because to be fair, that's the main issue, isn't it? That really, I mean, I often wonder for the whole thing, the lights go out, what on earth kicks in? I haven't got a generator in my backyard, but anyway. So yeah, so it is certainly obviously a policy and a strategy that we need. On paragraph 2.2, I'll write this down because I can't remember. It says communication with councils. An information document on emergency planning is available to all councillors. Is that when it says, is it another thing that's online and we can find it on
Yeah,
there?
that's online. We have in our own intranet, we have a Y-Drive, and there's a document for members to access that gets updated annually as well. If there's any issues, we will be running training sessions throughout next year as well for members to attend. We did one last year as well, and that's to update members and how they can help during a response, what their roles and responsibilities are, and also during the recovery as well.
Just following up for council plan. Perhaps after this meeting, we can share the link to the document.
Thank you.
That seems a good idea. Right, okay. Oh, Councillor Polenta.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that the key subcontractors have their own business continuity plans, but what is the process in place for the council to assess the subcontraction's own continuity and risk management plan?
Sorry, what's the last part?
So you say the subcontractors, the key subcontractors, I don't know how you define a key subcontractor, but the key subcontractors have their own business continuity plans, but is there a process in place for the council to assess the subcontraction, business continuity and risk plans?
Yeah, so the process at the moment is I'd write a report once we've done that exercise, and we would look at that report and see if there's any lessons learned, and then we would implement those into the business continuity plans for each critical service or whoever's affected.
Does anybody else have any questions? I think that was fairly short and sweet then. I think we don't have anything to actually vote on. We just had to scrutinise the document and the strategy and comment if necessary. So thank you very much. And hopefully we don't come across any crises that the document has to be used for. Oh, Councillor Matthews.
Sorry, just to say by word of thanks, I know we have had some training on this continuity management and the like, and where we have had natural disasters such as the floodings, the storms, I think the council's response has been really good. So it's just a bit of praise really where it's due. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Much appreciated, and it is a team effort, and we do learn lessons from storms such as Babette and Henk. And we also listen to the residents when there's been issues. It hasn't always been plain sailing. We do try and implement those lessons learned for the future. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yes, I have to agree. I do think this council rises to the occasion when it's necessary. And long may we continue to do that if necessary. Thank you very much for your report. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I assumed you would understand. Thank you. Yes, of course you may go. And if I may say, drive carefully, because I suspect we're now down to freezing.
Yes.
Right. We now move to item number 5, which is the annual customer feedback report. Mr. Palmer will present it.
Yeah, just going to get short. We've only got 6 slides on this presentation. I'll just share that now. Everybody can see that. Okay. So just to go back then, so this is our annual customer feedback report for 23-24. There was very similarities with previous years in terms of the number and volume of complaints. We've just got some of the headlines here. 48 complaints received in total, or what we call stage 1. So it's a two-stage process before anything might go to the Ombudsman. And we're happy in comparison, as you'll see a little bit later, with our fellow borough and district councils in the East Midlands, of where we're at with that and the volume that we receive. Last year, 23-24, was a slight decrease compared with the typical, but we very much you'll see in a slide shortly that we get roughly 40 to 50 a year. And there's various reasons around that, why that's such a relatively low number. It's decreased, those that reach the stage 1 to 27%, down from 36% the year before. And again, there's like a real key part to this is the consistency in the way that we handle complaints. We've got members of the team in customer services and in performance and reputation who've worked with the council for a long time and therefore understand many of the common theme complaints that come in, and that's why there is this consistency of approach. That said, every year is different. There's certainly new things that come up. As you can imagine, with a lot of the themes that we get lots of common feedback on every day as to why they would generate new complaints. But on the whole, there was that consistency in place because we've got that experience behind us. There really is, in this case, no substitute for it, as with any role, as you might imagine. So the analysis of the 48 complaints in 23-24 showed 79.2% were unjustified. That's a significant increase from the 66 before. Again, this word unjustified, I'm sure, is down to how you want to define it. What one person may say is unjustified may be different to another. But in terms of trying to push that forward, then obviously it's raised up to the Ombudsman. That's at the level then in which it is then subsequently seen whether or not it's justified, whether or not that complaint should have been upheld or not. What a key point is then at that penultimate point there, expectation levels are rising. There'll be a resident survey presentation to the Community Scrutiny Group in January that will go into more detail about how the resident survey results really highlight that understandably expectation levels of residents are certainly going in one direction. Their demands and their expectations are high, and that's the way it should be. We want to deliver great services, we want to be there, we want to meet that demand. But sometimes in terms of when it comes to complaints, certainly that expectation is possibly a little bit too high, or there's a misunderstanding of processes and how certain elements and functions of council's work. And that comes down to certain things, even down to, again, misunderstanding about which council does what. Things historically that we try and educate residents about, but that it's ever more in our eye line that we need to try and ensure that residents are aware of who to take which service complaint to. The compliments were a bonus as well in this year in terms of we received 203, 26 more than the previous year. This is just for comparison then, these couple of slides, just to show then that consistency over time. We go back to 57 then back in 21-22, but we're back down to 48. I mean, again, there's no absolute science as to why you would get more complaints in one financial year than another, but it's always a case that if we're not seeing them increase markedly, we see that as a positive. We're seeing that we're trying to keep up to date, trying to ensure that residents' expectations are being met, and or they understand the complaints procedure even better and understand that why a question can be answered in a certain way. If they've got a service request, for example, that it doesn't necessarily need to be a complaint, or it doesn't need to be raised to stage 1 or stage 2. By comparison then as well, talking about in the education of residents and understanding who does what and who responds to what, 34 complaints were against the county council, generally about highways. And again, there's consistencies with that we'll find when we we talk about the resident survey next year, that there is a real big piece of work to do from a communications point of view, again, to reiterate which council does what. In some cases, though, residents understandably have very busy lives. They haven't got the time to always check out who does what. They just want a response to their issue, and that's very understandable. Just in terms of the escalation of complaints, so figure at the top there. So we find around about 75% of the issues completed on our complaints web form or otherwise, they are relatively minor service issues that can be resolved very quickly, or certainly with an officer can respond to it and the resident is satisfied with that response. Again, we try and be understanding that as much as we try and make the website as easy to use as possible, we try and make communication across many channels, digital, face-to-face, as embracing as possible. People sometimes want to use a certain form in a certain way, and they feel that's their channel to contact us. So therefore, that's why we find a lot of people might use the complaints form, but actually it is a relatively minor service issue, and the residents themselves don't actually want to escalate it. They would simply want a response in as short a time as possible. The standard of response at stage 1 remains high. More often than not, the complaint is concluded at that stage, so there's no need to go to stage 2. But 15 of the 48 in this 23-24 were escalated. And as you can see from there, environmental health, planning applications, housing applications, insurance, online payments, waste and licensing. Which, as we said before, this was percentage of escalations past stage 1 was lower than the previous year. This is just to give more background then in terms of where the complaints have lied. So 51 out of 55 complaints were answered within target time, stage 1 and stage 2. And there were a few cases where it was unavoidable delays in responding to complaints. But in these instances, the complainants were informed that we were responding as quickly as we could. What we find with hitting target times is when it goes to either stage, for that matter, sometimes, particularly if you take a planning case or an environmental health case, there is a lot of documentation, a lot of context to understand, and there simply isn't enough working days possible. But usually in a stage 2 instance, for example, when it's 10 working days, still the vast majority are getting responded to in that time. So it shows in terms of that the officers are taking real time and effort to respond and try and get that response as high as right as possible. But as you can imagine, given the complexities of some cases, things can take a little bit longer. Justified complaints, 10 out of 48 would just have been justified, and this is lower than the year before, with 17 out of 50. And just on your left there, just for example, of where the actual service areas, the complaints have come in, and the response is in the target times. This is just a final comparison then with just our fellow districts and boroughs. You'll see that the unitaries aren't involved with this as well, just because of relative size, and obviously services given they would naturally get a higher proportion in theory of complaints because of the range of services that they deliver. And this is just an example for 23-24 where things lie. Again, we just put this up for information. This is not to say to hone in on that there is one council necessarily dealing with complaints better than another. There's lots and lots of factors as to why on any given year you may get some complaints that are upheld and go to the ombudsman and some that are not. But there's just some figures there for you for 23-24. The compliments as well, we just wanted to touch on very briefly. That increase from the previous year. It's always good to hear, I know, in terms of compliments are there to, I think, really help to motivate staff as well. I know they can be viewed in some way to say, well, it's officers doing their roles. But if we take some of those in our, for example, neighbourhoods team, our waste team, day like today when we've had snow, the volume of compliments we get, the teams really appreciate it. Both people face to face, but also those that take the time to phone in or email in with their praise and feedback. So as much as it's a minor point, maybe to the wider context about complaints, the compliments are really appreciated from residents when they send them in. So that was 6 short slides for you. Please let us know of any way you'd like to get a discussion.
And you finished on a high. Can I just ask, why would you mention that there were highway complaints? Surely, as soon as those come in, they're redirected to county council.
I think this goes back to some ways of completely understanding, as I talk about residents, everybody having busy lives and not necessarily going, this is the issue now I've asked you to respond to. If it's another agency, if it's another council, that's your job to go and do so. So you can signpost as much as possible, but still sometimes they want to pursue in that vein, and they'll even say, no, I'm sorry, I want to go to the Ombudsman. It may be another council that deals with this, but I want to go through the full process. And that's, completely understandable and up to them, that they feel that as we're the port of call they first got in touch with, for example, well, I should be able to see it through with you full stop, even if it's not a service that you're necessarily responsible for.
So they feel that they should go through stage one with
Correct.
us.
Yeah. And so even though that, for example, in that instance, the response would be very, we would back that back very straightforward to say, I'm sorry, it's not us, we don't run the service. They said, I'm sorry, I still want to go through the process. I still think you should. So I think in some ways is that this is where, as I say, there is work to do to understand resident expectation and understanding that there's a ways in which things should be easier.
Yeah.
And whichever council or agency responds, there should be a responsibility for the council to deal with that. So that's something to look at in the future, for sure.
But I do think there is an awful lack of understanding out there, which is understandable, about who deals with what. No matter how hard we try to tell people, it's just the council. And we have a good profile, so we're the one that gets hit. Anybody have any questions? Councillor Edderby?
Yeah, more of an observation really, because I think actually the number of complaints is very small. I absolutely, I know what you're saying, but most of our residents see us as the first point of contact because we send the bill. So it's something, it's difficult to get away from that because it says Rushcliffe at the top and that comes out. But I just think obviously we should never be complacent about these things, but I think it's year after year, you get small variations, but really they're not significant. They're incredibly low number of complaints that we actually get, and we seem to be very good at dealing with them. And long may that continue.
Absolutely. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. Just observation along the same lines, really. 48 complaints, a very small number of complaints can make a big difference in your percentages. So whilst it's up there, it's very nice. I think 48 is very low for this sort of industry, as it were. And when you look at the ones that were escalated, they're all the ones where we're naturally going to be at conflict. So they're planning decisions, licensing applications, building control applications, all the ones where we're going to be at odds with the people that we've made the decision about. So I think that's an incredibly good set of statistics, and I think something for Rushcliffe to be proud of. So thank you very much.
Councillor Plant.
Yes, it is a low number. Never having made a complaint, I'm just wondering how easy it is to make a complaint, really, in that, when it comes to elections and we go knocking on doors, you get a fair amount of moans and groans. And obviously not everybody follows the process through. And I think in terms of what Councillor Matthews just said about planning and licensing, they usually have very big personal issues that people will follow through simply because obviously it's affecting their lives considerably. And I'm assuming that most complaints probably now are by email. But again, if people, and there are, obviously still, we are an ageing society, and many residents still do use phone, I presume, rather than email. So how, in terms of, is there a response by phone or is it by letter? And the other thing that I was very surprised to read, and that could be just my ignorance, in the fact that if complaints go as far as the ombudsman, their recommendations are not mandatory. So, that complaint could get that far. They would hold it, come back to Rushcliffe, and Rushcliffe say, well, actually, we don't agree with you. So is that the case? And And can you tell me how many complaints have actually gone as far as the ombudsman over a number of years, presumably?
I'll come back with the wider statistics how many have gone. Yeah, we understand in terms of ombudsman will come back and say this is our recommendation, but we would take that very seriously. So I think in terms of when you say it's still our decision, ultimately, yes, it might be out of our powers, for example, do we physically cannot respond in the way in which the complainant, the resident, the point they're trying to make, we can't make that change. But if the ombudsman was suggesting, no, this is upheld, yep, you should be taking this action, we would very seriously consider what we would need to do. And that is very few and far between, and in recent years that's needed to be the case. If it has, it's probably come down on planning more than anything. And again, there's other considerations legally and otherwise what we can and can't do. So yeah, I'll get the figures in terms of how many have gone to the ombudsman over time for you, no problem. But yeah, we would absolutely take it very seriously. What anything comes back as in terms of recommendation.
So you're saying that if say it was a planning issue, and there's obviously, and the ombudsman is upholding it, if the sort of planning regulations were such that you couldn't support what the ombudsman is saying, that's right. Okay, but would the ombudsman not know that?
The potential, there's lots of, as you can imagine, the complexities and range of many parts of what might come in for a planning application, for example. What we would do is if we find that over time, not just for complaints, but for the feedback in a certain area, we would look to lobby the right agency, the government, to say, look, this is probably the same as nationwide. We thought this is what we find. Lots of issues come up that are very common, and therefore we would look to lobby the right agency or central government accordingly. That would be the route that we would go down. So if we can't physically do the actual and change it, we would say to the customer, the resident, to say, well, this is what we actively will look to do. So as I said, they're very few and far between, but when they do happen, that would be amongst the responses.
Just follow up, Councillor Pants just said, obviously there's issues like reputational risk as well. So clearly, if we're taken quite seriously, well, it wouldn't look good if we didn't implement an ombudsman recommendation. And I do know some councils who have been reprimanded for not answering questions as they should. So, and they've had to have specific training than their officers have because they've not been answering or dealing with requests as they should in terms of complaints. So it's not a very good look if we didn't act on it. In terms of the statistics, I do only historically from seeing these reports, the sort of statistics that we've just seen there are fairly similar every year. There's barely one or two or three maybe ombudsman complaints every year, so there's not a great deal there, thankfully, because we managed to obviously manage to deal with things eventually. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Linton.
Just a quick clarification. I may misunderstood. Complaints and challenges, they are bundled in, they are classified within the same group. So, for example, an objection to a planning decision, according to my understanding, is more like a challenge because it has like a legality, somebody disputes the process being followed, whereas complaint is more like a dissatisfaction. But in what you present, is it all, how do you say, grouped together? Just clarification.
Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. Exactly. Yeah, there's a little bit more of a framework because planning applications are, for example, technically what they are. There's a deliberately that route to put an objection in. We understand as a service there would be more. There's potentially more stakeholders, for example, wanting to have a say or a view about a planning application, and therefore the process is quite different. So yeah, you're right. A challenge is a good way of looking at it, whereas a complaint is more dissatisfaction with a particular service of something that's happened. So as much as planning elements come into it, and you'll see planning elements that will get risen to stage 1, stage 2, they can be different to planning applications. It's a little bit lengthy to go into at this point, but we could give you an example if that would help. Or an example after the meeting to show what the difference is.
Surely complaints with regard to planning is quasi-judicial, and therefore if somebody had a concern, then they can bring judicial review, which is really not what we're talking about here, is it?
I think the reason sometimes is that, for example, there might just be even a disagreement about what an officer's view is, and that's where that comes into this. So that's different to an objection about the physical part of an application that's been proposed. It could actually be the process by which an officer's done X, Y, Z. That's why it falls into then the complaint side of things. It's slightly different to the actual process of something you would feed into an application that will actually determine whether or not it's accepted or not. So we'll try and get you a more a differentiation between the two and examples of what might come in, and it's good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So a planning complaint hasn't actually ended up by going as a judicial review.
No, it's almost separate to that process, if that makes sense. It's almost to do with the function of us as a council. So, you know, certain teams all work in different ways, and it could be that complaint's actually about the process, about what we do, as opposed to an objection would be specifically about a particular application. So it could be wider issues about you have your officers got skills or training in this area, they're going to deal with this plan. It could even be pre-planning advice, for example. It could be nothing to do with, you know, not the planning portal or planning applications themselves. So, like I say, I'll come back with some better examples just to highlight them.
Anybody else have any comments? Well, thank you very much. We were asked to scrutinise the comments on the customer feedback and endorse the complaints policy. So are we all happy to endorse that policy? Thank you. Right. Will we now move on to the finance and performance management report, which I think Katie's going to deliver.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. So I'm going to talk through the Q2 finance position. So as we were in Q1, we're predicting a revenue efficiency. It's now 1.786 million. There's some more information given in the table. So table 1 gives some details of the main efficiencies and pressures that gets to that 1.786 million total. We propose to use this for meeting additional cost pressures and challenges. So you can see those in table 2, where we've given details of how we want to use that money towards those. In terms of the capital budget, again, we're projecting an underspend of 3.598 million, and there is further requests this month to rephase some schemes into 25-26. And as Councillor Plant said before, we've added some reasons on there to make those easier for you to see. There is then still remaining underspend after those within the capital programme. We discussed last quarter, should I say, the Travellers site acquisition. And so we're now suggesting that 1 million is released back into reserves, with part of it being used towards some carbon offsetting allocations. There is still potential for some savings with regards to Rushcliffe Oaks, Bingham Arena, and we've currently got some contingency budget that's not allocated. So those final figures haven't been confirmed, but are likely to deliver some savings full year. The disabled facilities grants, as we've previously reported, is fully committed. However, the work won't be completed within the financial year, so there will be a requirement to carry that forward. So that money won't be lost. It will just be moved to the same projects next year to allow those to be completed. Obviously, the underspend position means that we're unlikely to need to borrow in year, and just in general, things are starting to improve. Obviously, inflation has now dropped, collection rates are looking promising, and the multi-assets investment value has improved. So we remain in a healthy position, mainly due to interest rates, and obviously, you know, things can still change quickly. We've obviously just had a lot of changes with the government, so you know, we keep a close eye on everything, but things are certainly looking positive at Q2. Any questions?
Councillor Plant?
Yeah, a few actually. In terms of the travellers' site, I mean, this has been floating around for a few years, and I understand actually that it is a statutory duty to have a travellers' site, and I think what's the phrase where nobody's come forward with it? That's what, you know, as if, you know, somebody has to approach you and say, we have a site here, can we? Do you want it? So I'm concerned that that's on the, you know, that's moving into the future again. I know we're supposed to be having some sites on the Fair and Pastures or Tolland and Gampson or both. I'm not sure which where. And I really would like to get to the bottom of what, you know, what we should be providing in terms of travellers' sites in Rushcliffe, what we have got already, and where that is, and also what we need to have going forward. It's not, you know, if somebody could give me that information, I would. And then the fact that the £1,000, oh, sorry, million is going obviously from there into the carbon offsetting land acquisition. I'm just sort of I mean, we're now in November, and this obviously, this financial year obviously finishes in March. I mean, in terms of acquiring land that quickly, I would be surprised if that could be done, or if it was possible, because, you know, certainly buying anything doesn't happen quick. So I'm sort of wondering what the I mean, obviously, you know, we need to be doing it, but I'm wondering what the sort of rush is there really, and also sort of having some scrutiny of what the plan for carbon offsetting is going forward for us as a borough. So that was that. And my other thing, main thing, is the DFG grant, which I'm very, very pleased to see that 200,000 is going in. Very pleased. I mean, you know, I have to say that the Labour group did ask in their alternative budget for 250,000, and we didn't get it then. If perhaps that money was there earlier on in the year, it might have well allowed jobs to be done quicker, and more jobs to be done perhaps. On that, and when you say the work causes slippage, is that slippage because we haven't got the staff to process the applications, or is it that when an application is agreed, I'm not sure whose role it is to get the workmen in to do the job? Is that the role of the applicant? And is it that the fact that there aren't, you know, it's not that easy to get people in to do jobs? And, you know, I'm still, although we spent a lot of time talking about DFG grants, but it still seems that, you know, we don't sort of get to the bottom of why it doesn't work. Well, sorry, that's my opinion. Why it doesn't work better. Because I do know that, again, there are, you know, quite severely disabled people, and not just adults, obviously children too, are waiting a long time in considerable discomfort to get the support and adaptations that they need. Thank you.
I'll try and remember everything you said there. Some notes. In regard to the traveller sites, I think those questions have been covered in previous discussions where we have discussed the different available sites. There is notes in the minutes from last time where we've talked about that we'd put the call out for land, and we'd actually used an agent to try and find that as well, and that wasn't available. We do refer in there that as you correctly say, we do have to provide those things. So it's not that anybody's lost sight of that. And it is now going to be accommodated. We've got it in here within sustainable urban extension sites allocated in the local plan. So it just because we're taking this money away, it hasn't been forgotten about, and that is still being used. So obviously, I think your next point on that was about putting the money into the land acquisition sites. We're not necessarily saying that that's going to be spent straight away. Obviously, we've got underspends in there, so it's going to go into the reserves to be used for that, because we're aware that we are going to need money to pay for that land to achieve our carbon offsetting target. So it's making sure we've got that available as and when we can take the opportunities to acquire the land to achieve that. Was that all the question on land acquisition?
Councillor Plant, can you
how the DFG grant actually works in,
The DFG, yes, sorry, so I'll come on to the DFG grants, So I think, so we allocate a certain amount of money to do those works, and obviously there's a process that it has to go through in terms of scoping out those works and then getting those works done. So there is always an element that some of the money we've brought forward, so that we don't lose it, we bring it forward, but we won't be able to spend it all then. So there is always going to be an element of slippage, and that's not that we're not allocating that money out, because we are, and obviously we've allocated that extra 200,000 now, which wouldn't necessarily have made any of those jobs get done quicker, and obviously that will likely be carried forward into next year. Obviously, at the time of setting the budget, that money wasn't available, but we've now got some money from the underspends identified, so it's been put towards the DFG works.
Somewhere in the report, and I haven't noted it, in terms of the £200,000, I'm not. It mentions it going into the discretionary DFG, whereas the discretionary DFG was actually suspended about over 2 years ago. So is that incorrect, and it's gone into the mandatory, or what?
No, so we receive a certain amount of funding towards that, and then it's the discretionary pot is extra money that the council chooses to allocate to that on top of the mandatory funds that we get. So the funds that we get, we have to spend on the DFGs. So, but it's up to the council if they want to top that up. So at a point, it wasn't going to be topped up anymore, but the 200 has now been put into that. So it's basically extra money that we're making available that we haven't got through funding.
In the discretionary part?
Yes.
Okay, right. Going back to the travellers' site. So is there a possibility that I can sort of get a plan of where the sites are across Rushcliffe that we do have, and where we might have going forward from somewhere? Pete, I'm looking at you.
I can come back to you with it. We noted it in other minutes, but we can go back and have a look and get that information, Pete. I will ask the question.
So can we put that down as an action, that you'll come back on that? Councillor Matthews, I think you indicated.
Thank you. Two questions, but Councillor Plant has you just stolen one of those. But thank you for the answer. That was to do again. Very pleased that an extra £200,000 has been allocated to the disabled facilities grant. It's something that the joint scrutiny group was very keen on right the way across the whole group that were there for that meeting. And just to clarify, that has gone into the additional voluntary pot rather than the mandatory pot, that 200,000. As I understood your response to Councillor Plant.
Sorry. So it's additional monies that we're putting into that. So it doesn't really make any difference to the people receiving that. It's not that anybody's more entitled. it goes through the same process, but it's just additional funding that we've allocated, so it tops up the money that we've got.
Thank you, because there's a mandatory pot that we get allocated, and then the councils can apply a discretionary pot which can be topped up. So I'm assuming it's for that discretionary pot, as I understood it, that so that we can top up additionally those DFGs that come in.
Yeah, if we receive money that is specifically to allocate to disabled facilities grants, then that's the only thing that we can spend that on. So we have to allocate the money on that. The 200,000 is additional money that hasn't come as specific funding, but the council are saying we're going to put that 200 towards being able to award additional funding to families within the borough. Thank you. And my second question was just over the land acquisition for biodiversity. Is this 698,000 going to be used to purchase land in order to just set it aside, or is that 698,000 to enhance the land to make it more biodiverse? Because otherwise it seems that we're just purchasing the land that's already biodiverse, and doesn't seem to be adding any value, apart from saying it's now on our balance sheet rather than on the farmer or whoever else we bought it from. So there's the 698 that's there. There's also money that we put aside last year, and then there's the additional money that's going to be coming out of the 1 million that we don't need for the travellers site. There is, I'm not sure which group it went to, but there was a strategy put forward that discussed how we were going to approach that in terms of developing land that we already have, working with partners, and then acquiring new land was the final option on that. So there is a separate paper that is available that talks about the strategy for achieving the.
Yeah, that was the cabinet actually. It was the strategy on carbon offsetting that was taken to cabinet, which gave an approach that's going to be adopted by the council, which may involve acquiring land to plant and generate that way. So the size of carbon offsetting we've got to do is significant. So yeah, my question was around, does that money that we've set aside include us developing the land that we're acquiring to make it more biodiverse, or are we just buying land and setting it aside? It will be to develop the land, so it does. Yeah, you get the additionality. You've got to have the additionality. Thank you.
Yes, if I can just add, you can't just buy land and leave it. It's got to be maintained. Otherwise, it actually loses its biodiversity. Yes, and so presumably, like you're asking, that is included in that figure.
That is to achieve what is given in that strategy. That money is set aside to follow that strategy, which, as Pete said, is various options, of which one of them is to buy the land and plant on that land to generate the offsetting that's needed.
There will be an ongoing cost year on year.
There would be, ongoing costs for those. Yeah.
Sorry, those would have to be built into the budget as and when we acquire land. The other thing is working with partners, like Forestry Commission and other partners like that. So that would help minimise those sort of costs.
Councillor Plant.
In terms of the offsetting, will there be some sort of councillor training information in terms of how much to reach 2030 carbon neutral? How much land we will need to actually offset in order to reach that target? This seems to me, we're not in the administration, we're not the administration, sort of to be coming out of nowhere, not out of nowhere. I've heard that it's been mentioned, but suddenly we seem now to be in the process. So it's like, will we be taken with the process, all of us councillors, in terms of knowing what's going on, basically?
Well, if you read the report that went to cabinet in May, that gives you all that information. So it tells you the sort of scale that's required. as well as the strategy and the approach. So that was in May Cabinet. The other thing is, obviously, in terms of ongoing reporting on carbon reduction and carbon offsetting, we have there's an annual report that goes to I don't know which one of the scrutiny groups, communities, is it? I think that the carbon offsetting, or the growth, might be growth. But anyway, one of those groups does receive an annual report. So that does give updates on all of that whole sort of programme of work.
So just one additional question on the back of that, really, or an observation, I suppose. If we are purchasing land to set aside and to develop and make more biodiverse, how does that conflict with some of our planning obligations to build more homes, for example? Because we seem to be buying land to set aside, but at the same time we're building over it, or we're allowing building contractors to purchase it and build over it as well. So those two seem at odds with each other, and I know some of that is dictated to us by central government, but it does seem a little perverse.
I agree with you, but yes, as you say, it is dictated to us by central government. I don't know whether you have anything to add on that.
I'd call that a rhetorical question, because you pretty much answered it. There is a dichotomy there.
I guess that's a question of watch this space or watch this land.
Just one other thing I was going to pick up was about the traveller sites, which Council Plant was talking about. That has been discussed at full council at length. The numbers actually come through the local plan. That's where the actual numbers come, and then we've got till a certain date for those numbers to be achieved. Yeah, so I can't remember the exact numbers, but we can get those out for you.
Councillor Edwin.
I was just going to suggest, because I think I did make the specific point or ask the specific question at the last meeting, that by taking out that money for the travellers' site, was it because we knew that we wouldn't achieve a fixed travellers' site before we brought one forward at Fareham? And I think that the answer was yes, that's the reason we've taken it out. And I think there's a big difference between what we're obliged to do as a council in terms of providing provisions for travellers, and you know what we can actually achieve. And I know there's an awful lot of effort went into trying to identify sites. Funnily enough, landowners, when they find out that it might be a travellers' site, seem to shy away from selling the land. So it's not, it is very difficult to actually acquire it. And I think it's more, that we need to have a provision for travellers. It's there in Fareham, and Fareham is currently being delivered. So I just thought that we'd actually put that one to bed.
Okay.
Has anybody else anything they wish to say? Oh, Councillor Polenta.
Just a more generic question on the carbon offsetting through land acquisition, and because there has been criticism, not within the chambers, but it is overarching criticism that it can be used as a way to avoid and evade the issue of rapid carbon reduction, and we have committed to a net zero by 2013 and decarbonization. So my question is, what measures are in place to ensure transparency and accountability of the carbon offsetting initiative? Because there is criticism because there is wide criticism about the strategy of carbon offsetting. The same with carbon capture is a very, controversial issue. It does bring, so we need to have very robust processes in place to quantify it.
Well, I reiterate what I said. I mean, in terms of carbon reduction, the council's doing a hell of a lot of work. We've got the carbon reserve, which many councils haven't got, which we are using to improve. So it's a two-pronged attack in that sense. There's the stuff to do with the land acquisition and by net diversity gain, but then there's all this other stuff that's going on, which, as I say, that is under scrutiny. And in any case, there's an annual report, to reiterate what I said earlier, which does go to the scrutiny group. So there's nothing sort of being done that's underhand in any way, shape or form. There's clear transparency, and this council, I think, does more than most.
I think we need to switch.
Sure, yeah.
That's okay, no problem. It's short, you'll be pleased to know. Yeah, just on performance, the details are in Appendix F for everybody here. We've come over some key themes that I think we've done in recent meetings. There's not a huge amount that's new here, but it's worth looking at anyway. As a council, we're still experiencing sort of high levels of demand in previous years, but the performance, as you'll see, is stable or above target. There's 6 indicators then on this quarter to look at. Cumulative number of fly tipping cases. This is only slightly out of the target, but still continued proactive work with our contractors Wise, and fixed penalty notices are continuing. So it's a relatively ambitious target, but still that education and publicity around making sure that residents always use licensed waste traders, that's really, really important. So that will continue to try and combat the numbers of fly tipping cases. And rogue rogue waste traders that do exist, unfortunately. Moving on to the percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling, composting. We know we've said before that there's a national reduction in waste recycling at present. The figures here are still good; they're amongst the highest in the county, but there's always work to do on this one, and we know that. A quick mention here for the new small electrical service that's rolled out in recent weeks. I think it's a really good example. I mean, the residents recycled nearly 2 tons of items in just the first 2 weeks. That highlights many residents are engaged. They want to recycle more. It's just a case of reaching out to as many as possible to motivate more recycling. I know this is a thing we've come back to in previous meetings. The forthcoming national changes and simpler recycling should assist with this. And on the back of that, then moving on to the next indicator, the percentage recycling contamination rate. These are very much intertwined, and an action plan's continuing, such as around a campaign for ensuring that the right items are placed in the blue bin. Social media campaign continues, work with collection crews and residents, even down to also reaching out to hard to reach groups and understanding why there is high levels of contamination in some places. So again, the national guidelines will really help nip in the bud some of these problems. It will be simpler, it will be easier to understand, but in the meantime, we'll be cracking on with campaigns and education to try and get that recycling rate and higher, the contamination rate lower. For moving on to community facilities and the income generated from community buildings, this particular quarter we know ties in with the 6 weeks of summer, which is always a quieter time. Large proportion of block booking being term time only. The promotion of the venues continues though, and did throughout that period. And now even in the offices, they're working on proposals to have formal contracts with block booking hirers. So there's work there again to try and cultivate the relationships we have with those existing customers, and staff in the background as well are increasing training to try and transfer more inquiries into bookings, and that work's ongoing at the moment. Final one, just to look at building on what we said earlier about the complaints report. So 4 out of the 26 responses missed the 10-day target, one of those down to an officer leaving and having to pass on the completion to someone else. But again, 4 out of 26 in this case. I don't know if there's any points anybody would like to raise.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Yes, with regard to the recycling and household waste, etc., we are, as a council, trying to do our best to increase that. I mean, as we saw just recently, we're now recycling the small electricals, which I think residents will really welcome. And as you say, once the national guidelines come in, that will help as well. With regard to community facilities, that is difficult, isn't it? We need to engage more with the young people, I think. And I don't know what happens in other councils, whether they have similar problems, or if we could research a little bit other councils, and if we find some that are doing better than us, find out why. But I have to say that there's an element of people to run whatever goes on in those places, and so you're looking for volunteers. And I'm afraid to say it's incredibly difficult. I find that in my own ward in the villages. Yes, unfortunately, the volunteers are getting older. Nobody seems to be coming forward to take over from them.
I think part of it, I think I mentioned it in a meeting, it might have been this time last year, is the fact that if you take the majority of our community facilities are in West Bridgford, and being so geographically close to the city, you've automatically got a lot of competition there. So similar groups wouldn't really see that the border doesn't really sort of make a difference. So there's an element of that, but yeah, there's always things to learn about, ways in which to look at why groups want to use certain venues in certain ways. And of course, that has hugely changed after COVID. We understand that. So, yeah.
But unfortunately, we're no longer, we call them community facilities. We aren't acting as communities face to face. We're doing a lot of it on here, and that's what the younger people are doing. So those facilities are not getting used. Councillor Plant.
I think we did have Derek Hayden came to certainly the community scrutineers group to discuss the community facilities, and obviously a lot of work has gone on in the past couple of years. I mean, to be fair, a few years ago we had a pretty shocking booking service, and that works considerably better. It can always, I think, there's always improvements that can be made in that because things are always developing. But without a doubt, it has. And I think the thing is, certainly in West Bridgford, we have a lot of church halls as well, which when I first moved to West Bridgford, I couldn't get over how many churches there were in such close proximity. And a lot of work goes on there, and obviously they've got facilities as well. So it's like it's a lot of possibilities in the way of hiring places in a very small area. And as you say, in terms of a lot of volunteers are needed to keep these places going, and that pool is not perhaps as vibrant as it was. But and also a lot of money, to be fair, has gone into Rushcliffe's community facilities. And there's Julian Khan, isn't it? That's on the cards for the next work. So, I think you can do so much, but I mean, and as you say, a lot of it still is online, and we don't really want to go that way. We want to maintain those community facilities and get people engaging face to face.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Yes, we must remember that it's important to be face to face. Prevents isolation. Right, so I think we've unless anybody else has anything else to say, we have complied with the recommendations on page 49, and we have actually asked for some extra information about traveller sites, haven't we? Yes. So that will be in action next time. Right, we now move on to feedback from the chairman, and if I can start with Councillor Edderby.
Okay, so our last meeting was 19th of September. It was a very good meeting. We had a lot of, as often with governance, there's a lot of financial data to look at. But both internal and external audit presentations were very good. We looked at our risk management update, and we considered the sort of going concern figures. And I think it was comment was made. I just tried to remember, we weren't quite ready to sign off the accounts, but pretty much there. And as ever, I think we're very advanced compared with other councils in terms of our readiness to sign off our accounts. So, obviously, thanks to the finance team for the hard work they put in to make sure that we are ready on time. I think that probably sums it, most of the meeting up. It was very positive, and you know, we were pleased to be able to see how well we were doing. I won't go into the statement of accounts because we've just updated it anyway. So.
Fine. Thank you, Councillor Edavine. It's good to see that our finance team are doing a good job. Thank you very much. Right, Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. We held a joint scrutiny group on the 17th of October between Growth and Development and Communities, where we scrutinised the single issue of accessible housing, and that included disabled facilities grants and a number of other items. So the enlarged group were quite vocal and asked a number of questions of the officers present around a lot of different topics to do with how we encourage the building of more accessible housing compliant properties, and how though we ensure that developers actually have houses that can be converted, and what we could do as a council to encourage that and change maybe the percentage makeup, and also around the disabled facilities grants, how that's accessed, how that's allocated, and there seems to be a lot of disparity, or there was a lot of disparity in terms of the allocation for different authorities around Nottinghamshire. And we had some suggestions and some questions around that and how that could be looked at in the future, and again around how the council allocated the top up, which I'm really pleased to see has come through, and the council has put some additional funding into that to allow some of these adaptations to be made. But it was a really long and thorough meeting, and I thought went really well.
I was going to ask you, did you think that the joint meeting was actually fruitful?
Absolutely, yes. And we got some, the officers present actually were on the same lines as most of the councillors asking the questions. And I think there was quite a number of questions asked that were taken away by those officers. And obviously some of that has come back in the form of some additional money that's now been allocated. So I'm really pleased that some of what the comments were made seem to have been taken on board and actioned. So yeah, really positive meeting. Good.
Right, now Councillor Williams isn't here, but I suspect he would have been. Yes.
Sorry, I chaired the Borough meeting. Councillor Plant vice chaired it.
So Councillor Williams would have actually been reporting something similar.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Councillor Plant?
Councillor Matthews, something. It was a very interesting and informative meeting. I think it was quite, in terms of the two groups together, I think it was quite hard because there were so many people, and it was a subject that most people wanted to obviously comment or ask questions on. So yes, I wouldn't want everyone to be a joint one, but when obviously when the topic is such that it could be either or, then yes. But it was a long meeting, wasn't it? But it was certainly informative and helpful, and also just highlighted the crucial role that we have in obviously getting developers to build more adapted homes and accessible homes, because the need is there and they've got to step up to the plate and
exactly
do the business.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Plant. Yes, Mr. Linfield, I was going to ask you to comment in the next section anyway.
So I'm just going to comment on just from an officer, only the feedback I had from in terms of the officers that were there. They thought a bit like you actually, Councillor Plant, was quite a difficult, and it is more difficult when there's more councillors for people to convey the views. Now, I suppose one other observation, just if this became more of a regular thing, you'd start questioning why you need two scrutiny committees. So just to
Also, little unwieldy.
Yeah. I don't think it will be a regular thing,
No.
but where there are areas that cross over.
It's almost like a full council meeting.
Yeah. Right. Right. Okay. So I think we've dealt with group chairman. Now it's our lead officer who's going to give us a report
Oh, come on. Okay.
or comment
Well,
or whatever.
I wasn't going to comment any more than what I've just said, to be honest.
So that was it, right?
But I will say actually, just by way of information, I've been seeing Charlotte today as well, so she's doing quite well. Just for information, and thank you for those of you that have passed on your best wishes.
Good. I'm really pleased to hear that, and I understand she's extremely positive, but she's a very positive person. Right, so we move to the consideration of the scrutiny work programme. Now, we have no requests this time. Well, that doesn't mean to say there aren't requests in the pipeline, but they're not yet ready to come before us. But the very fact that we haven't got requests is actually, I think, a positive sign, because it shows that everything is on track and that we aren't asking to scrutinise something. So I think we should take that as a positive. And it says in our recommendation to consider additional items. Well, we haven't any. So we move to the current work programme, which the corporate overview programme is in fact a rolling programme, although I note in February we've got the White Ribbon Action Plan. We've had training by White Ribbon just recently, and there's an action plan in February which is coming to us for scrutiny. Governance, as Councillor Edderveen has said, tends to be a rolling programme, but in May you've got the Code of Conduct coming back, so that will make for an interesting meeting. Growth and development, the health of our towns and villages is coming up in their first meeting in January. And that, I think, is extremely important. We need to keep our towns and villages vibrant. And then the communities have got the resident survey, as alluded to earlier, and Nottingham's local nature recovery strategy. So we have got, obviously, the July-October meetings where anything that's in the pipeline can be put into those. So I think that takes us to the end of the meeting, unless anybody has anything they wish to say. And if I could thank the officers for attending and putting up with us. And please be very careful going home, because it'll now be freezing.